Well, I'm back. My first Lessons Animation Taught Us vid has been by far my most successful. So like any good Hollywood producer, I'm gonna exploit this brand until it fails miserably. I mean, it makes sense for my genre anyway. The main thrust of my channel is that of Disney movies.
Thrust. Male word.
And more explicitly, Disney animation. Here is a quote from my last Lessons essay.
Mostly at this point we just learned racial injustice bad. I mean, it was Disney in 1940.
So when Mikey issued the challenge for content creators to make their own Lessons Animation Taught Us video, I said yes and got right to work.
And I found out a lot about myself.
And I've learned even more now. If you don't know already, my channel exists to systematically review Disney movies and rank them into a list from best to worst while trying to be objective. Click subscribe if that sounds interesting to you. So far, I have made it through the Golden Age and the wartime shorts period. As a child, I learned a ton from Disney, but as an adult, there is a veritable cornucopia of life lessons to learn. Often it gets overwhelming as we sort out the good lessons from the bad. These movies are an interesting case study because they are both a window to the ways of the past and a mirror to our modern tendencies. So, when we look in that mirror, what do we see? Well, let's go back to a couple years ago, when the world was simpler and you could be a man who hit on, touched, and harassed women shamelessly and didn't have any repercussions from it. You know, the good old days. The days when women knew their place and those pesky minorities didn't stage peaceful protests in arenas. In fact, those pesky minorities knew that you got the right of way in the grocery aisle as a white male. You know, the good old days. What am I talking about? A white male had no place in a grocery store. His wife did all the shopping for him. You know, the good old days. I'm of course talking about 2017 on Maninist blogs. I'm joking. Well, unfortunately, I'm not.
I say immigrants, I'm actually using the wrong word. They're actually conquerors, and that's the thing we need to understand. They're here. Most white people are handing them the keys to our country.
But I really am, of course, talking about the year 1949. That year also happened to be the year The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad was released to theaters. It was the good old days. You know, I find the thought of the good old days to be pretty funny. There's never really been a good old day unless maybe you're talking about the day you got married or the day you found Jesus. No, the good old days are every day that you live, but they are those days in your memory 20 years later. Because we remember the good old days better than they are. And in the good old days, we had some clear entitlement issues.
If you were walking down the sidewalk and you meet white people, you step off the side and bow your head until they pass. Because if you didn't, it could be considered disrespectful and they might kick you, beat you, or put you in jail.
It was the good old days.
I'm not for integration, I'm for segregation, and I will be until I die.
It was the good old days.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
It was the good old days.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It was the good old days. Between the years of 1938 and 1949, 11 Disney motion pictures were released, and they each had a lot to say, as media generally does. Our modern eyes, though, see a lot of things that the original audience didn't. A boy who only receives love from his father if he saves the day, women who are only good if they clean any house they enter, marginalized people who get ahead through illegal means, cartoon-form blackface, a woman who makes the story happen and is condemned because of it, she also doesn't clean. Apples that end racism, stereotypical depictions of Latin America, men who need a woman to serve them, cowboys who kill Native Americans because they can, the most fragile male ego I've ever seen, and a boy who is taught from birth that being a man means being stoic, distant and watchful, silent and uncaring. Throughout the years known as the Golden Age and the wartime shorts era, animation taught us a lot of disparate lessons. I really love that word lately. Sometimes they were intentional deconstructions of a conventional social norm. Take Casey at Bat, for instance. When I first saw this movie and this particular short, I gave it a lot of hate, and boy do I still hate this short. However, after watching it with a prescient eye toward the pride of this hyper-masculine character, I began to see him as a deconstruction of toxic masculinity. This man hits all the right beats to be that hyper-masculine and yes, even toxic masculine figure. I mean, this man is so pumped up with pride he could fart to the moon. The crowds chant for him. He surrounds himself with beautiful women who he is leading on. He doesn't even keep his eye on the ball because his eye is instead mostly on the ladies.
Oh, Casey's the guy with his eye on the ball, but mostly the ladies.
He saunters up to the bat and demands that all eyes be on him. He hurts others to make himself look better.
That old double play, he's sure okie dokie.
He sneers and growls, and then in an effort to prove his fragile ego is worthwhile, he doesn't even hit the ball for 2 strikes because he has such confidence he will get a home run on 1 pitch. Then when he misses that 1 pitch, his fragile inner child is exposed for the self-conscious brat that it is, and he falls on the ground crying and continues crying well into the evening when he proves to himself that he cannot hit the ball regardless. This short teaches me that alpha male exterior is simply that. It's an exterior. It's a facade. The more you have to build up your ego, the more you really don't have one. And that's been true since the 1940s, and it's still true today. Speaking of toxic masculinity, I know this is probably the last thing you think of in regards to a hyper-masculine movie, but here I see a young deer that is given free rein to be himself with his friends while he is given the freedom to explore under his mother. I find it very interesting how this film goes out of its way to make these child characters so effeminate, and yet shows Bambi's dad in stark contrast. He carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, although they never show him do anything, and he is to be respected, although they never show him do anything. And as soon as Bambi's mother dies, he takes Bambi away and basically says, "Well, I guess it's time for you to grow up, son. Dry up those tears and act like a man, you wuss. I'll show you how to get all the ladies in the forest to want you as much as they want me." I'm just assuming Bambi is not his only illegitimate child. And what's worse, Bambi is groomed to become just like his father. This once charismatic and excited young boy now has all of the life he once exhibited neutered out of him by his father. He has to be serious so he can feed himself. Nobody knows what Bambi and his father actually do, and yet they are to be respected among the deer. No, they are pretentious masculine figures that teach children that they have to stick with their roles in order to have a respectable facade. The really messed up part is that this really was a part of life, even still is sometimes. So I still love this movie, but it's important to expose what this has the ability to teach our kids so we can intercept its path, ask questions, and help our kids to understand that not all media is God's honest truth. This clip also teaches me to be very thankful for the father that I really was given. He is a relatively masculine dude, loved sports, football, basketball, baseball, but he never once made me feel like I was unappreciated at all for being the musical kid of my family. And he never once missed one of the things that I did in high school. He came to every band competition, he came to every show choir dinner theater, he came to every musical I was a part of. I'm really grateful that I had his influence in my life. But yeah, sometimes media can present something bad, like toxic masculinity, as being something good, which Bambi does an awful lot of. Speaking of something bad being disguised as something good, sometimes it's important to look at something presented as good and dissect it, so we can see if there's any merit to its goodness. In this case, we're going to talk about Johnny Appleseed and his apples, and the Native Americans who consume them and begin dancing with the settlers. What a lovely image. It's an image of unity, right? Wrong. It's an image of deception. This is a trope that a lot of media likes to portray. They love to portray the idea that people who were once marginalized in society have a law or some sort of cultural attitude, or sometimes even just one person's opinion change, and that's the end of their marginalization. Racism solved.
Racism solved. Racism solved.
Native Americans still face adverse situations far and above what the majority of Americans face. Even just taking the idea of those apples being used for hard cider, as my brother and I discussed, has sinister applications. When we look more closely, Native Americans have a higher rate of alcoholism, both because they're more apt toward alcoholism, either by design or by exposure, and we white people made it easiest for them to put casinos and bars on their reservations to attract the business needed for them to survive. So we caused a problem for these people, and then we look at them and say, fix yourself, because we get along now, right? Sure, you could say we get along, but we don't take the time to understand these problems because we pretend the problem isn't there. It's much easier to rewrite history and say, and the natives and settlers became friends at Thanksgiving, instead of saying, and we pushed them onto smaller and smaller pieces of land until they finally had some of the worst pieces of the American landscape, where they tried to attract business by building casinos and providing tourists with copious amounts of booze. The same is true for African American cultures in the States, and that story has too many chapters to count. Let's just say that even the modern suburb isn't innocent. And don't pretend that blackface, even cartoon blackface, doesn't have hurtful connotations. As we look back at these movies, we see a microcosm of our culture at different points. Sometimes it actually seems self-aware, at least enough to diagnose a problem. However, at other points it's amazingly tone-deaf. But that's our history. Someday we will look back at our modern society and realize our own tone deafness. The only thing that is constant is change, and no one, not the most liberal or the most conservative of us, is safe from that change. Just look at all these people. However, just because culture changes doesn't mean the art should. The art should stand as a reminder of where we came from, and we should continue the discussion of what these movies were saying. What good they wanted to proclaim and what bad they didn't know they actually encouraged. We can learn from history, and the lessons animation taught us will continue to teach us as long as we are wanting to learn. Thank you, FilmJoy, for encouraging us in our creation and giving us this fantastic outlet. Thanks to all of you who have watched my former video, who watched this video, and who have created your own videos. I have found it incredible to listen to the stories of all of you out there. I'm always amazed at how much I can learn from people with different opinions. Subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you again for a lessons video after I review the Silver Age, or you can watch my next video next Tuesday at 4 o'clock.